Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Power of Dialogue. This is our third episode. I'm joined today by Ryan and George. Tom, unfortunately, was not able to make it this time. George, however, is feeling more on top of it.
Tom
Unlike
said he might be able to join us later,
yes,
so we'll see.
we'll have to see what's happening there. So, lots happened this week in the past few days.
Yep.
Probably biggest one to talk about is our Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, going into hospital. He reports have announced recently said he has been put on oxygen, but he, however, is not on a ventilator.
Good news. Good news.
Yeah.
It is quite an interesting one because it's obviously we wish him a speedy recovery so he can come back to full health and help lead the government's response. But it's an interesting one with who he then deputizes, because I know Dominic Raab said that he was sort of taking the lead, but apparently he hasn't actually spoken to Boris Johnson since Saturday, which is
Yeah.
quite interesting because it's who actually is leading the government's response is a really big question, and then who, while Boris is um, not able to do his job, is making big decisions, or will they just delay making any big decisions until Boris feels better and is out of hospital?
I don't think they can afford to waste time on it, really. Dominic Raab is acting Prime Minister now, I believe, officially. No?
He's been deputised. There
He's been
isn't a role. There isn't a role called acting prime minister
yeah.
in the UK.
Yeah, he is acting as the Prime Minister, however.
Yes, in formal terms, he is First Secretary of State, which is the highest cabinet minister below the Prime Minister.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see. I don't think they've officially confirmed what powers he has.
Yeah, I don't think anyone, even himself, truly knows what powers he has unless he exercises them.
Yeah.
I think it will be he'll just continue to do the role that Johnson would be doing if he wasn't in hospital, and if anyone has a problem with that, then they can take him to take it to the Supreme Court, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Well, the Prime Minister serves with the consent of the cabinet, so the cabinet may be able to challenge decisions he makes in a more immediate sense than the court much later on, especially if is on sitting. So, but it seems like he will work more collaboratively and won't take single decisions himself. He will have to seek advice of other cabinet ministers, more than Boris would.
I mean, we can already see though that coronavirus is spreading through quite a few of the top ranks in government. Gove has not got it himself, but he has had to start self-isolating due to a family member exhibiting symptoms. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think they've officially announced actually what happens if Dominic Raab gets ill, or gets seriously affected by this.
Who takes over after Rob? You think it would be one of it would be either Priti Patel as Home Secretary, has to be. It would be the Chancellor Rishi Sunak would probably be another good option. Yeah, in terms of the cabinet rank of seniority, the great states of officers of state in order are the Prime Minister, then Chancellor of the Exchequer, then Foreign Secretary, then Home Secretary. So whilst he's designated the Foreign Secretary also the our First Secretary of State, it would then go to Rishi Sunak. But this isn't an order of succession as in either the royal family or the US presidential system. This is essentially the cabinet themselves would decide who runs the country.
Yeah.
And advise to make them that decision. We do have to remember that it isn't sort of the PM doesn't have as much power as a US president would because because prime ministers will always be held to account by their cabinet
Yeah.
on decisions that they make, and so it's it's almost, but you've got to be thinking that the cabinet is going to be slightly more ineffective and slow at making decisions if they don't have a leader. So they do need someone with more authority to take the place of Johnson while he's ill.
Yeah.
I think should it be a fun an exercise to go through the powers that the prime minister would normally have, and do we think Raab would exercise them? As one of the main powers of the prime minister is to essentially is to fire members of the cabinet and of the government. Would if Gove, who whilst he's now ill, but it was said that Gove had disagreements over, as he is a more senior member of the government who has served in the government previously. If Gove were to do something to make a statement against what Raab wishes or intends the government's message to be, could he let him go?
I mean, surely not without consulting the monarchy on that as well. Surely.
The prime minister, cabinet's responsible to the prime minister. He decides to fire
Well,
them.
I'm saying, I believe the monarchy also has powers to appoint people to the cabinet, though. So that could well be.
From what I've been reading, the Institute for Government and other people seem to be saying that the Queen's powers that she could actually use are to advise, to warn, and I think, to challenge. She It might
I
happen under the Crown's name and as Crown servants, but it's the Prime Minister's day-to-day responsibility.
I think it would be ill-advised for um, Dominic Raab to
Yeah.
fire a member of the cabinet unless they explicitly come out against the government in a statement.
Essentially, if someone were to try and take power of the government that's not him.
Yeah, or to go against sort of collective responsibility of the cabinet, because once the cabinet takes a decision, even if you're in the cabinet and you disagree with it, you go along with that decision. That's collective responsibility. And so if someone would then come out against a decision that a cabinet was made, I think that would be and try and undermine the government. I think that's the only time that it would be acceptable for
Then
Raab.
In the event, however, of the prime minister's death, this whole story should change. I think once the prime minister's alive, that's probably more the case. We're going to have to look in the event, unlikely event, he does not survive this virus. That could well end up happening. We could see a cabinet reshuffle.
I think it would be very interesting to see what would happen at that point. Obviously, we really hope that that doesn't happen and that he can make a full recovery. But if he doesn't, I think it would be very, very interesting to see what the cabinet does as a collective at that point.
Yeah.
It seems to be it would be expected the cabinet would nominate themselves a successor for the Queen to become Prime Minister. But it's whilst Dominic Raab would be chairing that cabinet meeting, they are not bound to designate him. They may nominate whoever they wish, who has the.
I find it unlikely in that situation, though, that it wouldn't be Raab. I find it unlikely that they would go against the obvious wishes of the former Prime Minister.
I don't think it would. Does the Conservative Party have a deputy leader?
No, as a party, they don't have a deputy leader.
Because unlike Labour, because if it was the Labour Party, obviously it would be the deputy leader who.
However, the Labour Party doesn't have procedures. If the leader is to die, there is no procedure for the deputy leader to become leader. They have to select an interim leader. It could be the deputy, but that's not automatic.
That is true. I think in the unlikely case that the Prime Minister is to die, it's an unprecedented circumstance. So whatever.
Any other Prime Minister has ever died in office?
One Prime Minister has died one has been assassinated and one has died of natural causes. trying to get up the details on, but not recently. Yeah, the assassinated prime minister was the 11th of May, 1812. And yeah, and the cabinet recommended a successor, but it took a while for him to be confirmed as prime minister because it wasn't a very stable government.
Yeah. Well, I think
Can't
if that's the precedent, then surely that is what will the government will do. The cabinet will offer a successor, probably in a secret ballot in a cabinet meeting.
Yeah, but cabinet generally doesn't operate on secret ballot. They normally not publicly, but within the cabinet would know who was supporting who, which is a very hard thing to, as if you, a very.
Yeah.
But then one of the questions during the daily briefing that happened before Boris Johnson was admitted to the we should say we haven't yet said he is in the intensive care unit of hospital, not in hospital. Was that who receives daily security briefings and can Dominic Raab authorise action overseas?
Well, as foreign secretary, you'd expect him to be
he's a privy councillor, so yeah, he gets
in the best place to make those decisions. So I think it would be a sensible option to allow Rob to make decisions about security.
Yeah,
I think also in that would in those sort of meetings would have to be obviously Secretary of State for Defence.
Yeah, obviously. An interesting one of these unanswered questions is about the letters of last resort held on British submarines in event of the UK chain of command cannot answer if there's a nuclear strike on the UK, do they retaliate or not? Which are written by the Prime Minister as their first role upon forming the government. It does not seem like Dominic Raab will write those letters, but if he is to become the Prime Minister, he would have to suddenly be making decisions that, in the event they happen, would cause millions of lives to be lost or not. That of someone who's been in government who has never seemed like they were going to become Prime Minister, and
I think there's so many decisions that have to be made in such a quick time scale if Johnson doesn't make it through, which hopefully he will, because then this can all be avoided. And I think it would be very interesting to see how that then affected the sort of future of government and the future of the Conservative Party, depending on what decisions they make.
Certainly, yeah.
So I think, George, you were suggesting that one possible approach would be a government of national unity. Do you want to outline?
Yeah, I think given the current sort of circumstances, I think the question that really needs to be asked, because government of national unity isn't without precedent. They were in wartime governments. In World War II, we had a government of national unity with Churchill and Attlee, and sort of heading that government. The real question you have to ask is: are we at the point where this is the biggest crisis that we've faced since the World War, and does that then mean we need a government of national unity to help, pull everyone together, especially if Parliament is going to be closed and the Prime Minister and the government not being able to be scrutinised, having all parties within the government to sort of counterbalance each other and scrutinise each other's ideas, surely is a very plausible way to allow scrutiny of government and ideas proposed.
I feel that if an election had to be postponed because of coronavirus, like a general election, that would be a very strong case for a government of national unity until the election could be held. But the Conservative Party have got have only just started a term. But then I do get what you mean without Parliament sitting and without scrutiny, proper official scrutiny, that there is an argument to be made for it, but I don't think we're yet reached that point.
I think it would be interesting because I'm not sure that it would be, one thing we've seen with the coronavirus outbreak is that laws have had to be changed extremely quickly, and we have been able to see that Conservative government have managed to do that because they can react far quicker. But if we do have this internal dialogue between all these party elements, I'm not sure whether we'd be able to react on the same scale and speed.
But with the emergency legislation was behind closed doors, agreed between Labour and Conservatives. That's why it could be nodded through Parliament without.
I mean, the emergency legislation was, but that was a different thing. That there have been other elements that have just
You mean like financial response and stuff like that? That is a political decision to make.
Yeah, like the political elements. Yes, there have been the coronavirus bill, and that was agreed on both sides, which is amazing that was able to be put through so quickly. But I do think there are going to be other elements. There might be more red tape to kind of go through, which might actually make our reactions to the situation ever changing potentially too slow.
Yeah.
I think it's very possible that you could have a slow response if you have to collaborate. However, in sort of these times, you've got to have a quick response, but you've also got to make sure it's thought through and the correct thing to be doing. And I think bringing people in who have a sort of different perspective might be a better way of looking out for people who might not have been thought of in sort of the first phase of legislation, because I know that it took a while for the government to outline the scheme for the self-employed after they outlined a scheme for workers.
Because they say there were difficulties with fairness, because some self-employed people who make online content are going to be doing better than ever, as everyone's staying at home and all they can do is watch stuff on the internet. So it's hard to paint everyone with the same brush in the terms of the variety of businesses. But it is also has got to be said that out of the Labour Party, just many of them in the shadow cabinet aren't going to have had like experience in government or working on the same level with civil servants, which is a big thing to get used to. But they haven't got used to it because for whatever reason they haven't been in government recently.
We also have to look if we expand the government in that sense to such a size, we also have to look at the Secret Service and whether they'll be able to actually cope with the protection aspects that are required.
It would be people who in the cabinet may have or some people may have to lose their jobs or resign. I can't see the government expanding hugely.
I think we'd have to, though. I think we'd have to, because if we're looking at all the different elements of it, if you're talking about putting out a financial package or something like that, you're going to need both the Chancellor and the Shadow Chancellor. To provide that aspect. If you're talking about the unity side of it, you need both inputs.
You would have to essentially double the size of the cabinet,
which would be very resource intensive in a lot of different elements.
And that in the very few things in the UK that actually are legislated on, they would probably have to become unpaid ministers, as there is a cap, which we are already at, on the number of paid ministers of different type. There's a limit on how many people can be full cabinet members. They would only have to attend cabinet meetings, but that could be dealt with.
It could be,
Yeah.
but I find it, I think that in this time there's going to be, if the longer lockdown goes on for, I think there may well end up being more hostility towards government. Um,
I think that is true because I think the problem with it is because it's so difficult to see any kind of change in your surroundings or even a result of what you're doing. It can often feel sort of a bit pointless, or I think people can sort of um lose the reason why they're really like the government is doing this, which is to try and protect the public. But I think it's very problematic when you have a prolonged lockdown period because I think people get frustrated that their sort of individual liberties are being taken away for such an extended period of time, and so it'll be a very small minority of people who become very frustrated with with the government and their response to it. And so I think it could be as as lockdown continues, I think it would be interesting to see the sort of different tactics that the police have to use in order to um, deal with people who aren't following the rules.
I think the issue is smaller towns actually. There's a smaller town just near Exmouth that I know of, and I have a contact there, and they're saying that basically like the streets are full of people every day because they're just not adhering the guidelines because they don't care. Um, and it's a small place, and so the police aren't actually able to monitor it due to the budget cuts or whatever, and multiple different reasons that they can't actually have enough officers. So I'm fully expecting within the next few weeks probably to have the military brought in.
I
I
I
think they're going to have to bring them in eventually.
I think it probably. I think if the government have to increase the restrictions on the lockdown, like Matt Hancock was talking about, getting rid of the um, uh, the sort of one exercise, going out and getting exercise a day, getting rid of that as part of your as essential. I think then would be the time to bring the military in.
Yeah,
But
I'm
up
fully expecting
until
us to ban exercise.
yeah, up
that
and
would
up
that would
up until
require
yeah, I think up until
require legislation though to remove that as an excuse, as that was written into the law. So Parliament would need to be open.
it's true.
Yeah,
The government
Um,
could change advice, but its advice isn't legally binding. Sorry
I
for
think that's the issue. I think the advice should have to be legally binding. I
they would.
don't think I don't think it should be. I don't think it should be advice in that sense. I think it should be made into laws in every sense because I think that the stricter we have lockdown, hopefully, the shorter it will go on for because there'll be fewer infection rates and we will see that curve flattening.
But I think the government has to at least they can't just start enforcing guidance. It would be a bad precedent to enforce guidance as law without making it a law.
Certainly.
An emergency recall of Parliament, I can see them in one day making it into law, but I cannot see enforcing it. But in my personal experience of going for a bike ride through Exmouth, they seem to be things people seem to be following the guidelines, and it is quite quiet. And
Yeah.
in when I was out in where I live, I saw a border force car. We're nowhere near a border here where I live,
Yeah.
and and they were dressed up. So I didn't. I should have asked them in hindsight, but they seemed like they might be out encouraging the public to stay inside. But that's speculation.
I think um, especially over the weekend, I saw a big rise of people out and about when I went out, because it's been so sunny and so nice that people think, oh, I'll go out for, you know I'll go out for my exercise, or I'll stay out a little bit longer to and so I think I think people, although people are following it, I think some people are sort of, I think they're becoming a bit more relaxed with what they can get away with, especially in smaller towns where there is less of a police presence, because they can just get away with just being outside and walking around, and being out for extended periods of time, maybe 2 or 3 times a day, because there's no one there who's gonna stop them doing that. And I think up until the point one of them, someone gets ill, I don't think they'll continue to adhere to the guidance. So I think bringing in the army, I think, is something that does need to be looked at some point in the
I
near
would.
future, if we don't see a flattening of the rate of infections and deaths.
Well, we are starting to see a flattening, um, but it's nowhere near as strong as it needs to be.
Yeah, but I think also, you and until we see over like a prolonged period, like a week or two, a real flattening of the curve, or a real flattening of the curve, then it could just be other factors that have stopped people getting infected, um, or maybe one day a few people decided not to go out. That slowed the rate of infection, but it can jump up again. So I think it's difficult over, like, a 3 or 4 day period to really establish a trend.
Yeah, we're going to have to see what's going to happen at the next uh, review, but on Monday.
That is true. I think
I
it'll be very interesting to see in that review whether or not Johnson is well enough to attend the review, and whether or not he then makes the statement, or whether that will be again deputized to Rob.
I think Johnson will try and get there if he can, but I'm not convinced he'll be able to. I think that it would be imprudent, certainly, for him to go out, because he'll still most likely be even just recovering um, by then. I don't think it would do the nation much good to see a weakened prime minister.
Yeah.
so I disagree with the use of military as a police force generally, because they're quite bad at it. They're not trained in police for well, I struggle to say this, but in the history of Northern Ireland, of the military being deployed domestically within the UK, shows an awful precedent of them attempting to control law and order. That's not their job. It never has been.
I think the mindset of many of these people, though, is, oh, no one's going to catch me. I'll go out and I'll do these things because no one's going to be about. Even just having the theoretical deterrent of these things. And I'm also not proposing the military act exactly like police officers. Some of these people, as I've heard it explained by one person, should have it explained to them down the barrel of an M16. Having that shock factor, basically. Having
I
explained,
would
can't
I would
just go out.
support unarmed military being used as essentially like public informants. Say if there is a big group of people, they tell them to move on. If they refuse, they can bring the police to deal with it, and just to increase the public face of it, because you see them out and around everywhere. But armed military on British soil is, I think, not the way the government seems like they want to go, because it's not the
I
right
don't
thing
think any
to do.
government wants to go that way, but we have seen that it's ended up being almost required by both Italy and Spain have both deployed the military. The US has deployed the military. China deployed the military. Um, I do think that, I mean, if it goes on much longer, we're going to need to, because the police force is going to get stretched out. The police force are going to start catching it, which means the numbers are going to dwindle. We're going to have to bring it in, and I think that having a strong show of power like that, in many ways, and the shock factor may well knock, may well drive the idea to stay into even more people. Yes, the majority of people are following, but I don't think enough people are following.
I think that just in terms of sheer manpower, I think the military don't need to be doing anything particularly special, but just in terms of sheer manpower that they have, that the police just can't ever really replicate. I think it would be a good idea to bring the military in to help with policing, and obviously they're going to have to be you know trained really quickly and told what to do really quickly by police so they can get deployed out on the streets fast enough, because I think it is just, especially in like smaller more rural areas, it's just the lack of presence of police just sort of make people think, oh,
Yeah.
I can get away with um,
How many
just
police
breaking
do we have
guidelines.
in the UK?
I've just looked this up. There are 123,000 police officers in the UK, and there are 146,500 regular military
Yeah, and
personnel
only
and
20,000 of
36,000
those.
reserves.
Yeah, and 20,000 are currently in on standby, I believe, to be drafted in.
And quite the logistical cores are already in place with. They were the ones, the Royal Engineers, I think, were building the Nightingale Hospital
Yeah.
in London. So the
I mean, can we just say how
that's
amazing it is that they managed to get the Nightingale Hospital up in the amount of time that they did?
It is it is quite an impressive feat of that they managed to turn the Nightingale Hospital around in, was it a couple of
9
weeks?
days.
Yeah,
yeah.
it is extremely impressive, and I think it shows sort of a collective response from the country. Because I think mostly the country collectively has had a really good response to the advice that the government has given and any challenges that have been, thrown its way. I think um, especially key workers in the NHS, carers, supermarket workers, especially. I think have had a fantastic response to the crisis, and it's just really unfortunate that there's just a couple, a few. There's just a few people in each community within society who feel, oh, the rules don't apply to me, and that makes it so much harder for everyone else.
Yeah. I mean, just an example of I think that we one of our next door neighbours is reasonably elderly, and his I think it's his son or grandson, comes to visit him, like comes into the house once a week. Actually, I think it might be twice a week, but he brings his girlfriend with him and things like that as well. And I think that is, we can just see that's an example of how people are kind of treating this. They're going, it'll be fine. I'm just doing it once a week, or it'll be fine.
Yeah,
I already see him. They're so different.
the sort of I can get away with it, so therefore I'm going to do it. But it would be, if he's carrying because you can carry the virus without displaying symptoms, I'm pretty sure, and so
Yes.
it's really, I think that's an argument for mass testing, firstly, but secondly, it's then really dangerous if you don't follow the government's guidelines, because you can spread it to vulnerable family members who, if they are then in close contact with other vulnerable people, then that's how it can really quickly spread and become a really dangerous become really dangerous.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of people that well, I think that having presences. I think we should be closing more of the main roads as well. I saw something on the A30 the other day, and it was completely quiet. 3 cars, I think. Um, it's a uh, very eerie, but there are still those 3 cars on it. And why are they there? They could be key workers, but I find you have to find yourself wondering what these people
I
do.
I think
this
I think it's very problematic to close key roads because it restricts travel of key workers. I think
True.
what is needed more is more sort of police blockades on roads to check where people are going, what they're doing, to make sure that they are they have a purpose to travel. And so I think having that's why I think the military also would be a good option for that, because I don't think the police have the numbers in order to blockade sort of the main roads in
Yeah.
order to ensure that people are complying with the government guidance.
Yeah. It's a pity we can't automate more of it. I think it'd be rather easy to check number plates against the owners, or those who are insured or whatever, against key workers.
but
We
then
those types of information. I think it would be very. It's almost disappointing that we don't have the infrastructure on our roads to be able to do that.
with lots of people helping out food banks, delivering food to the doorsteps of the old and vulnerable, there's no national database of food bank
True, but they could.
volunteers, NHS volunteers. There
But,
are.
but I
I
don't think it'd be overly hard
I
to do to sort that.
I think,
I think it would be
however,
hard.
uh,
I think.
I think it would be difficult, but it would also be expensive to get storage of the data. But I think it also then raises huge questions over privacy, individuals' privacy, and their sort of data rights. If the government is harvesting that much data from them, I think it could be it
I
it
don't think
could
it'd be
be.
overly expensive to sort. Coming from the computer science aspect of it, I think that it'd be relatively easy, and you wouldn't need to store much data. You wouldn't necessarily even need to store their names. You can run the checks without actually transmit, which without almost breaking GDPR and the data transfer processes in that. I think the thing that we really would need is more digital cameras on the roads, which we don't have. So it's
It's not a short term enough. It can't be implemented soon enough for it to be
yeah,
effective. That's
that,
a future idea, I
yeah.
think.
Um,
Definitely.
I think just showing how much of this is an evolving situation. In the time we've been on air, a spokesperson for the Prime Minister has said, should Mr. Raab be taken ill, Chancellor Rishi Sunak would be next in line to take over. So that answers your question from earlier, Stephen.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's good to sort of get clarification from the government on that, so that we know what's
Yeah.
going on. I think yeah, I think the next thing, the next sort of big thing after the Labour leadership election of Starmer was his appointment of his shadow cabinet.
Indeed.
Uh, it was a very interesting shadow cabinet, I think. And I think the main talking point for most people is the reintroduction of Ed Miliband onto the front benches.
Yeah. I think it's an
Um,
interesting move by Keir Starmer. That. Um, I think he definitely seems to be trying to maybe go back and regain some of the supporters from when Miliband was in power potentially. Trying to move back over to that slightly more centre, trying to move a bit closer to centre on that front.
I think that
But
is true, but I think the whole sort of dynamic of left, right, and centre of the Labour Party has been dramatically shifted after the sort of 5 years of Corbyn. I think because Corbyn was sort of moved the Labour Party so much back to sort of social democracy and sort of values of nationalisation, I think that the centre ground has almost shifted further left in the Labour Party than it possibly was before.
Yeah.
Because I've seen people compare Starmer to, oh, we're going back to the Blair years, but I really don't think Starmer is anything like Blair at all. I think Starmer is a completely different beast compared to Blair.
Yeah. Was it two appointments? What I have found interesting is where he's decided to place his two rivals during the election. I think Lisa Nandy putting as shadow foreign secretary is an interesting choice, considering she was third. Like, she's effectively been put higher up than Rebecca Long Bailey, who came second.
And also,
I
Rebecca
think
Long Bailey used to hold the position of shadow foreign secretary. She's been removed from her role to be put as education.
I find her choice of education interesting as well.
I think it shows a definitive shift. I think that's what Storm was going for. I think it shows a definitive shift in party alignment while still maintaining some of the more left-leaning politicians within the party. So I think Nandy is probably even more centrist than Starmer is, and I think promoting her to foreign secretary and moving Long Bailey to education really shows, I think, a shift in ideas in this shadow cabinet compared to Corbyn's. I think that's also what he's trying to do. He's trying to sort of mark his territory of, okay, this is my shadow cabinet. This isn't a rehashing of Corbyn's cabinet.
Yeah. That is definitely. I definitely agree with that. I don't think there's really many particularly interesting members, like interesting places in it.
I think one of the main things that surprised me, or it didn't surprise me, but that Rosina Allen Khan was given a place within the shadow cabinet as I think it was mental health health secretary, and I think it really. I think it's a real recognition of her sort of, because she came after the votes were redistributed in the third round. She came second in the deputy leaders race, ahead of Richard Bergen, who was sort of tipped to be Corbyn's choice candidate. And so I think it's a real show of from the members, firstly, that they want to change from Corbynism, but also a show from Starmer that he's sort of taken on board the results and the sort of will of the members, even though she didn't win. She's clearly very popular because before the start of this race, I'm not sure a lot of people will have heard of her as an MP, and I think it's sort of almost a reward to the testament of how good a campaigner she was.
Yeah. I don't think there's much more to say about that. I think it's going to be interesting to see this cabinet and how it performs, or the shadow cabinet rather.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to be watching Ed Miliband closely and kind of seeing, is there a reason, like, is it a political reason he's been brought back, or is it an actual?
I think very, very possibly it could just be the fact that now that Labour hasn't been in power since the end of the beginning of 2010, and that's basically 10 years now that Labour has been out of office, and so you need more experienced members within your cabinet to sort of help you understand what it's like to be especially if they get elected in government in 2024, which seems unlikely, but there's always a chance, especially with sort of the unprecedented circumstances at the moment. I think I think that's more the reason he's included Ed Miliband as more of a sort of an experienced politician to help guide some of the sort of newer members who have just recently been promoted into the shadow cabinet.
Yeah, unlike Sir Keir Starmer, Ed Miliband did spend a bit of time as a junior in the junior section of government. He has been part of the government, which is a unique, well, not unique, but uncommon amongst the rest of the shadow cabinet.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things I did see was I think Yvette Cooper was left out of the shadow cabinet.
Yeah, I did notice that. That was
yeah, she's not.
I thought that possibly she'd be brought back in. Possibly though, Starmer thinks that because she holds an important role in select committees. I think she's head of one of the Brexit select committees. I think he thought it was important for her to continue scrutinising the government in a select committee rather than be brought into the shadow cabinet. And someone who I also thought would possibly be brought into the shadow cabinet was Ben Bradshaw, given that he's not just because he's a local MP to us, but he's a really experienced MP, and has been MP for Exeter since 1997.
Yeah. Who is currently the longest running MP?
It was the House. I'm not entirely sure because can't remember his name. The guy who was Father of the House before.
It was Kenneth Clarke.
Yeah.
Until currently Sir Peter Bottomley.
Conservative or Labour?
Click on him. He's Conservative.
I thought with anybody that he had to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the reason Ed Miliband's included is purely as a sort of because he's an experienced MP. Because he's an experienced MP, I think that's why he's been brought in to sort of help those who maybe aren't as experienced.
However, as he is in the role of business environment, business, energy and industrial strategy, before he was leader of the opposition, he was the energy minister. And with there should have been, I believe it has been postponed, the UK hosting the climate conference, that is quite a big role that he can. It's not he hasn't been made something that he either has no history in or is very junior. It's actually quite a big role.
Well, I think that's what the shadow cabinet needs. I think they need someone in a sort of high respected position that isn't the leader of the party to help sort of guide decisions. Because Labour hasn't been in power for such a long time. I think they need that experience to help them sort of maintain their sort of credibility as an opposition and a proper alternative to the government at the next election.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of what the shadow cabinet shows. It shows that Labour has sort of moved back to more centre ground and can be taken seriously as a alternative to the Conservatives to run the country.
Yeah. I don't think. Do you want to briefly touch on? We've got about 10 minutes left. Do you want to
Should we
briefly touch? So what's that?
I was going to say, should we go through and we could try and cover some positive news, or do you want to do as or
Let's
how long
let's
this
let's look
take?
at some other news then, shall we? So there are a few bits that I can think of off the top of my head. For the first time, China has reported no deaths. That's a good sign. We are starting to see the curve plateauing more in Italy and Spain. That seems to be really starting to come into coming useful there, and we're having fewer reported deaths in the UK currently.
New cases in South Korea stay under 50 for second day in a row, and as a whole, the South Korean government will be looked upon by historians, I'm sure, in the future as an example of one of the best responses worldwide. They
Yeah.
definitely deserve praise for how they have handled it, and we hope to emulate them in future.
Yeah, certainly.
Absolutely, I think they've handled it very well. I think it will be very interesting to see how governments are compared around the world. So the sort of how the US government is compared by the US people to governments in South Korea, and I think questions will be asked of some of the countries who have high death tolls at the end of this about what more could have been done compared to countries who have lower death tolls at the end of this.
Yeah, I think it's going to be fair to say America's going to be put under quite a lot of scrutiny.
But some of that's on a state level, as 9 states, as far as when I last saw yesterday, still haven't put in place a mandatory lockdown or stay-at-home order, because it's
Yeah.
being done on a state-by-state basis based on their political structure. So that puts them at a disadvantage
I think
for a very centralised approach.
what will be very interesting is to see what party controls each of those 9 states, because
Yeah.
I think whoever doesn't act quickly now, I think will be held to account at the next elections for either local elections or for the House of Representatives, the Senate, and even all the way up through to the presidential elections.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. How do you think this is going to affect Donald Trump's performance in the next election?
I think it really depends. It really depends on how the situation progresses in the US. I think if we just see the death toll continuing to rise and rise with no proper response from the American government, I think no matter how much he tries to sort of spin it as fake news, people will start to lose people that they love, and I think especially at this time, I think it's a fantastic time to argue for if not a nationalized health service, sort of the Medicare for all approach, which is being argued by more left-wing Democrats like Sanders and Warren. I
Yeah.
think now more than ever is a fantastic time to have that debate in America.
Yeah, but also in the US, the Centre for Disease Control updated its guidance to advise the general public to wear cloth masks. And then President Donald Trump said he would not be following that voluntary guidance, which definitely shows, does he trust in the experts in the US? That's not the guidance here in the UK at the moment, but
It's the opposite guidance. They're actually mostly saying that face masks don't work, don't use them.
because they don't.
Well, I
Unless
think
you're in eye
that
contact, unless you're in a potential regular contact.
I think the view of the UK government is they don't want your average Joe using medical stocks of masks that would be much better placed used in the NHS.
Yeah.
definitely, I think the US is definitely going to have questions asked of it, and I think especially if Donald Trump continues to sort of down his gung ho, not trusting experts or scientists, they will just see the death toll rise and rise, because it's not a political issue that you can sort of deny and wiggle your way around. It is a medical issue that you cannot deny, because the number of deaths will continue to rise if you don't act.
Yeah.
Another short, interesting story was: did you both watch the Queen's speech?
Yes.
What did you think of that?
I didn't think it told us much that we didn't already know. I think
But
that
it was very reassuring that
it was reassuring, but I think that the content wasn't groundbreaking. I don't think it was anything particularly of great note in it. But I think that she did well for the fourth in her reign.
yeah, the morale boost to encourage people to follow the guidance is just what we needed and what she can do.
Yeah.
But
I think just
especially
continuing to repeat the guidance is something that just needs to be done, and it needs to be done by senior figures like the Queen, that everyone, because she's non-political, that people sort of trust more than possibly the Prime Minister or any politician.
Yeah.
I think it's just important that the guidance continues to be repeated, and then after that continues to be enforced.
Yeah. Something I'm surprised they haven't done yet is put out in any advertising breaks or whatever. They haven't actually just got a thing that repeats the guidelines. In any and all.
what TV have you been watching? I've seen two different types of adverts, both by the British government
I've seen some, but I'm saying in every ad break, in every. I think that if we talk about reinforcing that message, I think it would, you start to get to a point. Everyone knows the auto glass repair, auto glass replace. I think everyone's going to get.
Stay home, protect the NHS, save lives.
I'm going to start getting into the same thing. It's just someone says stay at home, and you're like, yeah, I'm protecting the NHS, saving lives. It should be a reflex to go, I need to stay home, I need to.
Yeah, I think almost every single ad break on TV, every single.
I think Georgia's internet is playing up, just so.
Yeah. Okay.
Hold on, I think I had connection issues there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think any ad breaks on TV, ads online like YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, I think the majority of those need to be the repeating the advice of the government.
Yeah. Especially to those younger people who might be going, you know what, it's nice weather, let's go out, let's meet people.
Yeah. Or it won't affect me, I'll be fine, is a very sort of selfish mindset to take. And I think it's important that it will affect you, it does affect you, and it will affect the people you love if you continue to sort of ignore the guidelines.
Yeah. And on that very cheery note, I think we should probably call it there.
And we wish Boris Johnson a speedy recovery.
Yes, let's hope this time we will be able to give you more news on lockdown and how long that's likely to be. and also hopefully some more positive news regarding our Prime Minister. Thank you both for coming on today. Hopefully we'll have Tom next week as well.
Yeah.
And thank you to everyone at home, as we're sure the many thousands of people who are watching this.
So stay home, stay safe, protect the NHS, as Stephen says we should all be saying.